A dream of universal knowledge. In the golden age of the ancient world, there existed a dream unlike any other, a dream to gather all the knowledge of humanity into one place. This vision was not of temples to gods, nor palaces for kings, but of a sanctuary of the mind. It was the birth of something extraordinary, the great library of Alexandria. Imagine the bustling city of Alexandria around the 3rd century BCE. Ships from every corner of the Mediterranean anchored in its harbors, their sails carrying the colors of nations near and far. Traders shouted, their voices mixing with the salty breeze. The scent of exotic spices, cinnamon from India, frankincense from Arabia, and myrrh from Nubia filled the air. Merchants exchanged goods, sailors swapped stories, and travelers marveled at the towering Pharos lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guiding ships safely into port. And within this city, a city carved from Alexander the Great's grand vision, a new wonder was rising, not a wonder of stone, but of thought, not a monument to conquerors, but to the human spirit. The library. It was a dream commissioned by the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt, successors of Alexander himself. Ptolemy I, a general under Alexander, began the idea, but it was his son, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who carried the dream forward with fervor. His vision was radical: to collect every book, every scroll, every fragment of wisdom that the known world had to offer. No idea was too small, no story too distant. The great library would not just be a building, it would be a repository of the world's collective memory. The vision of Ptolemy. 2. To understand the birth of the library, one must understand the ambition of Ptolemy II. Unlike his father, who ruled Egypt with military might, Ptolemy II ruled with intellect and diplomacy. He wanted Alexandria not only to be the political capital of Egypt, but also the intellectual capital of the ancient world. And so, he set about creating an institution unlike any seen before. The Mauseon, or Temple to the Muses, would house philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, poets, and physicians. These were not just scribes or clerks, but some of the brightest minds of the era. They would live within the library complex, funded by the state, free from financial burdens, devoting their lives solely to learning. Think of it, a community of scholars gathered under one roof, living, eating, debating, and creating together. It was the world's first true research university. How they collected knowledge. But how does one fill a library meant to hold all the knowledge of the world? Ptolemy II and his successors developed a strategy that was bold. Some might even say ruthless. Every ship that docked in Alexandria's harbor was searched. If books or scrolls were found on board, they were seized and taken to the library. Skilled scribes copied the texts onto fresh papyrus scrolls, and the originals were stored, while the copies were returned to the owners. Over decades, this practice filled the library shelves with works from Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and beyond. Legend says the collection grew into the hundreds of thousands of scrolls, though historians debate the exact number. Some claim there were as many as 700,000 scrolls. Others suggest far fewer. Yet even a modest estimate would make it the largest collection of human knowledge in antiquity. Alexandria, the perfect setting. Alexandria itself was the ideal place for this grand vision. Founded in 331 BCE by Alexander the Great, the city quickly became a hub of trade and culture. Situated at the crossroads of the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Nile, Alexandria was a gateway between East and West. Ideas flowed as freely as goods. Here, Greek philosophers debated with Egyptian priests. Indian travelers shared ideas with Babylonian astronomers. Jewish scholars translated sacred texts into Greek. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, was said to have been created in Alexandria, a project that itself reflects the spirit of universal knowledge. The library embodied. The library was not a closed temple. It was a living organism, constantly fed by the lifeblood of trade, travel, and intellectual curiosity. What did it contain? The library sought to gather everything: scientific treatises from the mathematicians of Greece, medical writings from Egypt, philosophical works from India, records of kings and dynasties from Mesopotamia, maps of lands, both real and imagined. Among its shelves, one might have found early theories of the atom from Democritus, astronomical charts mapping the stars, medical writings on surgery and herbal remedies, histories of lost civilizations now forgotten, epic poems, myths, and plays, the stories of gods and men. The sheer scale of this collection meant that the library did not just preserve knowledge, it also sparked new discoveries. Scholars who might never have encountered certain ideas in their homelands now found themselves in contact with them in Alexandria. Ideas collided, and in those collisions, new knowledge was born. A place of great minds, the library attracted some of the greatest thinkers of antiquity. Euclid, whose elements became the foundation of geometry, is believed to have worked in Alexandria. Archimedes, the legendary inventor, studied there. Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy, served as the head librarian. Imagine walking through the halls of the library and passing by Eratosthenes as he explains how shadows in Syene and Alexandria reveal the curve of the earth. Imagine overhearing Archimedes sketching a design for a war machine or a water pump. The library was not just a place for storing scrolls. It was a living workshop of human genius. More than just books, the library complex was part of the Mausion, which included lecture halls, gardens, dining rooms, and even living quarters for scholars. This was not a silent, dusty archive, but a vibrant, intellectual community. Scholars debated in courtyards, students gathered around teachers in open-air forums, experiments were conducted, theories were tested, discoveries were shared. In this sense, the library was not just a container of knowledge, it was a crucible of innovation, the symbol of a new age. At its heart, the birth of the great library represented something profound. Humanity had always preserved knowledge, on cave walls, clay tablets, and oral traditions. But never before had there been a concerted effort to gather all knowledge under one roof. The Library of Alexandria was a bold declaration. Knowledge is power, knowledge is universal, and knowledge must be preserved. It symbolized the belief that ideas should not be bound by borders, religions, or languages. It was, in many ways, the first attempt at a global knowledge project, centuries before the printing press or the internet, seeds of its fate. Yet, even in its birth, the seeds of the library's tragic fate were sown. For while Ptolemy II dreamed of a universal repository, others saw danger. Knowledge is power, but power is rarely shared freely. Empires rise and fall, religions clash, and wars are fought. And in each of these storms, fragile things like scrolls and papyrus often perish. The library's very ambition to gather all knowledge made it both a beacon and a target. And though it was born in glory, it would one day be remembered more for its destruction than its creation. Closing reflection for Chapter 1. As we leave this first chapter of the library's story, imagine it at the height of its glory. Rows upon rows of papyrus scrolls, their fragile fibers holding centuries of human thought. Scholars from across the known world, gathered in candlelit halls, debating the mysteries of the cosmos. The sound of pens scratching, the smell of ink and parchment, the hum of voices, all woven together into a symphony of knowledge. This was the beginning of one of humanity's greatest treasures. And yet, as we turn the page, we know that its end would be as dramatic as its birth. For the Library of Alexandria was not destined to live forever. Chapter 2. The City of Alexandria, a jewel on the Mediterranean. Before the library, there was the city. To understand how the great library came into existence, we must first journey into the heart of Alexandria itself, the vibrant, ambitious city that became its cradle. Picture the year 331 BCE. The young conqueror Alexander the Great has just completed one of the most remarkable military campaigns in history. He has subdued Persia. He has stretched his empire from Greece to the edges of India, and he now turns his gaze to Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, of pyramids, of ancient gods. When Alexander entered Egypt, he was not seen as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Persians, who had ruled Egypt harshly, were despised. To the Egyptians, Alexander appeared as a savior. He honored their gods, visited their temples, and even traveled across the desert to the oracle of Amun at Siwa, where priests hailed him as the son of a god. But Alexander's vision was not only military or spiritual. He was a builder. Wherever he went, he left cities behind, living monuments to his conquests, and among them, Alexandria would become his most enduring legacy, founding a city of the future. According to legend, Alexander chose the site for Alexandria himself, standing near the Mediterranean coast. He looked upon a stretch of land between the sea and Lake Mareotis, near the canopic branch of the Nile. The location was perfect: a natural harbor facing the sea, fertile land inland, and access to the river routes of Egypt. With a sweep of his hand, Alexander ordered a new city to be drawn. Greek architects, led by Dinocrates of Rhodes, sketched the plans in flour on the sand: a grid of streets, wide avenues, marketplaces, temples, and palaces. The city would face the sea, bold and open, its streets straight and ordered. Unlike the winding alleys of older cities, the city was not just practical, it was symbolic. Alexander wanted a place that reflected both Greek ideals and Egyptian tradition, a city that bridged worlds. And so, Alexandria was born. Though Alexander himself would never see the city completed, he died only a few years later. His successors, the Ptolemaic dynasty, poured their wealth and ambition into building it into a jewel of the Mediterranean, a hub of trade and culture. By the time of Ptolemy II, Alexandria had become a cosmopolitan hub, a crossroads where East met West. Ships from Greece, Rome, Phoenicia, Carthage, India, and Nubia filled its harbors. The streets bustled with merchants selling everything from papyrus scrolls to silks and spices. The air was a symphony of languages: Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, and many more. Its population was as diverse as its trade: Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Syrians, and others lived side by side. Alexandria was not just a city of Egyptians. It was a city of the world. The Ptolemies encouraged this melting pot. They wanted Alexandria to be a place where cultures mingled, where ideas exchanged hands as readily as goods. This cosmopolitan spirit made it the perfect place to house a library that sought to collect the knowledge of all mankind. Wonders of Alexandria. The city itself dazzled travelers. Ancient writers described it as one of the greatest cities of the world. Its wide boulevards stretched in perfect grids. Its palaces gleamed with marble and gold. Its temples honored both Greek gods and Egyptian deities. But two landmarks above all defined Alexandria: the Pharos Lighthouse and the Royal Quarter. The Pharos, standing on the island of the same name just off the coast, was a marvel of engineering, rising perhaps 350 feet into the sky. It guided sailors safely into harbor with a massive fire at night and mirrors by day. It was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and its light was visible for miles. The royal quarter housed the palaces of the Ptolemies, the mausoleum of Alexander himself, and the great cultural institutions of the city, including the Mosion and the library. For travelers approaching by sea, the sight of the lighthouse and the glittering city behind it must have seemed like entering another world. The spirit of Alexandria. But what truly set Alexandria apart was not just its wealth or architecture, it was its spirit of curiosity. This was a city that embraced learning. The Ptolemies invited scholars from across the Mediterranean to live and work there. They offered patronage to poets, mathematicians, physicians, and astronomers. They supported philosophers and priests. In Alexandria, a Babylonian astronomer might share theories with a Greek mathematician. An Egyptian priest might debate philosophy with a visiting Indian sage. Ideas that once seemed confined to one corner of the world flowed together in the city's bustling streets and quiet lecture halls. It was this unique spirit that made Alexandria the natural home for the great library, religion, and identity. Alexandria was also a city of contrasts. The Greeks who ruled it brought their gods and traditions, but they also absorbed elements of Egyptian culture. Temples to Zeus and Apollo stood alongside shrines to Isis and Osiris. The blending of Greek and Egyptian religion created new forms of worship, such as the cult of Serapis, a god invented by the Ptolemies to unite Greeks and Egyptians under a shared deity. This mix of cultures was not always harmonious. Tensions sometimes flared between different ethnic and religious groups, but the diversity of Alexandria also gave it an energy unmatched in the ancient world, a magnet for scholars. By the 3rd century BCE, word of Alexandria's opportunities spread far and wide. Scholars who once had to rely on the limited libraries of Athens or Rhodes now dreamed of working in a place where the rulers actively sought to collect and preserve knowledge. Imagine the excitement of arriving in Alexandria for the first time as a scholar, the harbor buzzing with activity, the lighthouse towering above, the streets lined with marble, and somewhere within the city, a place where you might encounter scrolls from India, maps from Carthage, or texts from Egypt older than the pyramids themselves. The city itself was a magnet. The library was its beating heart. Alexandria, as the stage without Alexandria, the library would not have been possible. The city's wealth funded it. The city's diversity filled it. The city's ambition gave it purpose. Alexandria was not merely the background of the library's story. It was its stage, its lifeblood. The two were inseparable, and as the library grew, so too did Alexandria's reputation. To speak of Alexandria in the ancient world was to speak not only of trade and wealth, but of knowledge, wisdom, and the pursuit of truth. Closing reflection for Chapter 2. As we close this chapter, picture the city of Alexandria at twilight. The last light of the sun reflects off the marble facades of the palaces. The harbor quiets as ships settle in for the night, their sails lowered, their crews resting. In the distance, the Pharos begins to glow, its fire lit, casting a guiding beam across the dark sea. Within the city walls, scholars walk the colonnades of the Mausion, scrolls in hand, voices low. A hush falls over the library as torches are lit, casting a golden glow on the papyrus shelves. Here, in this city of contrasts and wonders, a dream is taking shape. The dream of preserving all human knowledge. The city of Alexandria was more than a place. It was a promise. And it was within this promise that the library was born. Chapter 3. The Dream of a Universal Library. The Vision of Ptolemy. The great library was not built in a single day, nor was it the work of a single man, but behind it all stood a dream, a vision of a place where all the world's knowledge could be gathered and preserved. That dream belonged to the early rulers of the Ptolemaic dynasty. After Alexander's untimely death in 323 BCE, his empire fractured into pieces. Egypt fell into the hands of Ptolemy, the first Soter, one of his trusted generals. Ptolemy was not just a warrior, he was a statesman. He understood that ruling Egypt required more than military might. It required legitimacy. By embracing both Greek culture and Egyptian tradition, Ptolemy secured his throne. But he also wanted to elevate Alexandria into something greater, not just a seat of power, but a beacon of culture. And so, the idea of the library was born, inspiration from Greece. The Greeks had long valued learning. Athens had its philosophers, Rhodes had its schools, and smaller libraries existed throughout the Greek world. But these were limited, often private collections, sometimes open only to elite citizens. Ptolemy and his advisors imagined something far more ambitious, a state-sponsored institution dedicated to collecting, preserving, and studying every text, every idea, every story known to mankind. No one had attempted anything on such a scale before. It was nothing less than a library of the world. The Mausion. The library was not an isolated building. It was part of the Mausion, literally, the place of the Muses. The Muses in Greek mythology were the goddesses of inspiration, poetry, history, music, science, and more. To dedicate a place to them was to dedicate it to creativity, study, and discovery. The Museion was like a university, research institute, and cultural center all in one. Scholars lived there, taught there, wrote there. It had lecture halls, gardens, dining areas, and observatories, and at its heart stood the library, a sanctuary for knowledge. Imagine walking its halls. Rows of papyrus scrolls, neatly stored in clay jars. Scholars bent over desks, reading by the flicker of oil lamps. The air thick with the scent of parchment and ink, and the hum of quiet conversation, debates, discoveries, dreams. This was not just a library. It was the living mind of the ancient world, collecting the world. The ambition of the Ptolemies knew no limits. Their goal was not simply to gather Greek writings. They wanted everything. Stories say that any ship that docked in Alexandria was searched. If scrolls were found on board, they were seized, copied, and the originals were placed in the library. The copies were returned to the owners, often with apologies, but the Ptolemies wanted the real treasures. Ambassadors were sent abroad with orders to purchase books, scrolls, maps, and manuscripts from every corner of the known world. Works from Greece, Egypt, Babylon, India, and beyond began to fill the shelves. Over time, the collection is said to have grown into the hundreds of thousands of scrolls, perhaps even close to 1 million, though the exact number is debated. What matters more is the vision. No knowledge was too foreign, no wisdom too small, no culture too distant. Dreams of total knowledge. This dream, to gather everything, was revolutionary. In a world where travel was slow, where communication was limited, where most people lived and died without ever leaving their hometowns, the idea of universal knowledge was breathtaking. The library was not just a building of scrolls. It was a symbol, a statement that human wisdom belonged not to one people, but to all. For the first time in history, a civilization was attempting to hold the memory of humanity itself in its hands. A meeting of civilizations. Because of this ambition, the library became a place where civilizations met. Egyptian priests contributed texts on religion and medicine. Babylonian astronomers brought their charts of the stars. Indian scholars shared ideas about numbers and philosophy. Greek mathematicians refined theories of geometry and physics. Jewish scribes translated sacred writings into Greek. In one place, under one roof, knowledge that had been scattered across continents now existed side by side. It was as though the library gathered not just books, but voices of the past and present, allowing them to speak to one another across time and culture. Knowledge as power. Of course, this dream was not only about wisdom for wisdom's sake. Knowledge was power. For the Ptolemies, the library was also a tool of prestige. To be the rulers of the place where the world's knowledge was stored was to declare Alexandria the intellectual capital of the world. If Athens had philosophy and Rome had legions, Alexandria had something greater, the memory of mankind, the fragility of the dream. But even as the library grew, there was always a shadow. Knowledge is powerful, but also fragile. Papyrus scrolls could crumble, ink could fade, fire could destroy in moments what took centuries to collect. And while the Ptolemies dreamed of preserving all human wisdom, they could not escape the reality that such dreams are always at risk. Yet in those early years, the dream shone brightly. The library stood not only as a storehouse of books, but as a testament to human curiosity, the belief that to know the world was to better it. Closing reflection for Chapter 3. As you drift into thought, imagine once more the library at its dawn. The colonnades echo with footsteps. Scholars whisper across marble courtyards. Scribes carefully copy texts by lamplight. Outside, the city of Alexandria hums with life. But within these walls, a greater hum persists. The hum of ideas weaving themselves into eternity. Here was the dream, that no story would be forgotten, no discovery lost, no wisdom silenced. A dream that one place could hold the light of the world. This was the dream of a universal library. Chapter 4. The Scholars of Alexandria, a city of ideas. If the library was the heart of Alexandria, then its scholars were the blood that kept it alive. The dream of the Ptolemies, to gather all the knowledge of the world, would have meant little without the men and women who studied, copied, debated, and expanded that knowledge. And so, the library was more than shelves of scrolls. It was a community of thinkers, philosophers, scientists, poets, mathematicians, physicians, and historians all lived and worked within the walls of the Mausion. They were given stipends, free housing, and the honor of being part of what was perhaps the greatest intellectual experiment the ancient world had ever seen. This chapter tells their story. The first librarians. Every great library needs guardians. In Alexandria, these guardians were the chief librarians, men of immense learning who were chosen to oversee the vast collection. The first was Zenodotus of Ephesus, a Greek scholar and grammarian. He was more than a caretaker. He was an organizer. With thousands upon thousands of scrolls, there had to be some system, some way to bring order to the chaos. Zenodotus began the work of cataloging and correcting texts, laying the foundation for the first great library index. But after Zenodotus came a man even greater, Callimachus of Cyrene. Callimachus was not only a librarian, but also a poet. He is credited with creating the Pinakies, a vast catalog of authors and works that filled over 100 scrolls. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a modern library database. Without Callimachus, the library might have collapsed under its own weight. These first librarians were not simply record keepers, they were visionaries. They believed that knowledge should be classified, preserved, and made accessible. And they set the tone for all who came after them, the poets and storytellers. The library was not only about science, it was also a home for the arts. Poets gathered there, writing verses that would echo across centuries. Apollonius of Rhodes, who once served as head librarian, composed the Argonautica, the epic tale of Jason and the Argonauts. Unlike Homer's vast and heroic poems, Apollonius's work was quieter, more personal, fitting for a man who lived among books and scrolls. Other poets found inspiration in the library's collection of myths, histories, and foreign tales. They rewove old stories into new forms, ensuring that the voices of earlier ages continued to live on. In this way, the library was not simply a storehouse of the past, it was a forge of new creativity, the mathematicians and scientists. But it was in the realm of science and mathematics that the library's scholars truly shone. Here worked Euclid, whose Elements remains one of the most influential books in the history of mathematics. With calm clarity, Euclid laid out the foundations of geometry, principles that students still study today. Here too worked Archimedes, who visited Alexandria during his lifetime. Though more closely associated with Syracuse, Archimedes exchanged ideas with the scholars of the library, sharing insights into levers, pulleys, and the mysteries of buoyancy. And then there was Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who became head librarian in the 3rd century BCE. Eratosthenes was a man of extraordinary curiosity. He measured the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy, using nothing more than shadows, geometry, and his mind. He also attempted to map the known world and study the movement of the heavens. For his wide-ranging knowledge, he was nicknamed Pentathlos, the all-rounder. These men embodied the library's spirit, the belief that the universe could be understood, measured, and explained through reason, medicine, and anatomy. The scholars of Alexandria were not content to study the stars or the numbers on parchment. They also studied the human body. Herophilos of Chalcedon became known as the father of anatomy. Working in Alexandria, he conducted dissections, something that Greek culture had long considered taboo. Through these studies, he described the brain, the nervous system, the liver, and the eyes in unprecedented detail. Another physician, Erasistratus, made strides in understanding the circulatory system, describing the function of veins and arteries. Such work was not without controversy. Some later sources claim that these doctors even performed dissections, or worse, vivisections, on living prisoners. If true, it casts a shadow over their legacy. But what cannot be denied is that Alexandria became the center of medical science, laying foundations that would influence healing for centuries. A place of debate. Within the library, ideas collided. Scholars debated philosophy, tested theories, and sometimes clashed fiercely. This was not a place of quiet agreement. It was a place of intellectual struggle. One philosopher might argue for Plato's ideals, another for Aristotle's logic. A poet might defend Homer's verses, while a critic sought to prove that lines had been wrongly attributed. These debates were not distractions. They were the lifeblood of the library. Out of disagreement came refinement. Out of refinement came progress. Women in the library. Though much of history remembers the men of Alexandria, women too found their place in this world of learning. The most famous of all was Hypatia of Alexandria, though she lived centuries later, long after the library's golden age. A philosopher, mathematician, and teacher, Hypatia carried the torch of Alexandrian scholarship in the 4th century CE. Her presence reminds us that the library's legacy was not limited to one gender, that the pursuit of wisdom has always been, at its best, a universal human endeavor. The weight of knowledge. To be a scholar in Alexandria was both a gift and a burden. Imagine walking through the colonnades, knowing you were surrounded by the wisdom of thousands of years. Every scroll you touched connected you to a distant land, a forgotten author, an ancient voice. To study here was to carry the weight of civilizations on your shoulders. But it was also a joy, for in this place, the love of knowledge was not a solitary pursuit. It was shared. It was celebrated. It was a way of life. Closing reflection. For Chapter 4, picture it now. The scholars of Alexandria gathered in the gardens of the Museion, debating under the shade of trees. Others bent over scrolls in cool stone rooms. The smell of papyrus thick in the air. Poets whispered verses. Mathematicians drew diagrams in sand. Physicians studied the mysteries of the body. This was the soul of the library. Not just books, but people. Not just knowledge preserved, but knowledge alive, growing, evolving. The Library of Alexandria was not a silent tomb of learning. It was a living conversation across centuries. Chapter 5, Treasures of the Scrolls. A library without equal. When we think of a library today, we imagine books neatly stacked, organized by subject and author. But in the Library of Alexandria, the treasures were not bound books, but scrolls of papyrus. Each was fragile, handwritten, and unique. The library's ambition was staggering: to collect every piece of knowledge in the world. This meant philosophy, poetry, mathematics, histories, plays, songs, religious texts, and practical guides. Anything that could be written down. To walk its halls was to step into the very memory of civilization. But what exactly lay inside those shelves? What kinds of scrolls did Alexandria guard so jealously? And perhaps more importantly, what was lost when they vanished? The epic tales of Greece. Naturally, the works of Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey were among the most prized possessions of the library. Scholars pored over every line, debating the meaning of words, correcting errors, and preserving copies for future generations. Beyond Homer, there were the plays of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus, the tragedies, that had once shaken the theaters of Athens. There were the comedies of Aristophanes, full of wit and satire. These works shaped not only literature, but also philosophy, politics, and the human imagination. To lose even a single line was to lose a thread of the cultural fabric. Histories of the ancient world. The library held histories, not just of Greece, but of Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. There were the works of Herodotus, the father of history, who recorded the stories of nations from Greece to Babylon. There were the writings of Thucydides, who chronicled the Peloponnesian War with sharp-eyed realism. But what excites historians most is what may have been preserved from lost civilizations. The library could have held records of the Hittites, the Phoenicians, or even of cultures long vanished, their names erased except for a few scattered ruins. Imagine what it would mean if we had detailed records of the Minoans or of Carthage before Rome destroyed it. These were treasures we may never recover: science and mathematics. Among the scrolls, too, were the works of mathematicians and scientists whose discoveries shaped the modern world. Euclid's Elements, as mentioned before, was surely there, a foundation of geometry. Archimedes' writings on levers, pulleys, and volume would have been copied and studied. But what about the texts that did not survive? Archimedes is said to have written dozens of works, many of which are lost. Could Alexandria have held them? Perhaps there were treatises on mechanics, on optics, on astronomy, knowledge that might have advanced humanity centuries ahead of its time. Medicine and healing. The scrolls also contained medical texts, some from the Greeks, others translated from Egypt and India. The works of Hippocrates, the father of medicine, were likely studied here, along with the writings of Herophilos and Erasistratus, who practiced in Alexandria itself. But the library also sought foreign knowledge. Reports tell us that Ptolemaic scholars translated Ayurvedic texts from India, and possibly medical writings from Persia and Mesopotamia. If true, then Alexandria may have preserved an astonishing collection of healing traditions, a global encyclopedia of medicine, sacred writings. The library was not only secular, it also contained religious texts. It is said that one of its greatest treasures was a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, known as the Septuagint, commissioned by Ptolemy II. This translation made Jewish wisdom accessible to the wider world and influenced later Christian thought. What other sacred texts might have been there? Perhaps hymns from Babylon, rituals from Egypt, chants from India. The library, after all, welcomed everything, every language, every tradition, the knowledge of Egypt. We must not forget that the library stood in Egypt, a land with one of the oldest written traditions in the world. Egyptian priests had been recording wisdom for millennia, texts on astronomy, medicine, architecture, and the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts, treatises on engineering and agriculture. These too could have been housed in Alexandria. Perhaps the library held manuals on how the pyramids were built, or on the secrets of mummification, secrets that remain mysteries to us today. Lost technologies. Some dreamers imagine even more. They wonder whether Alexandria might have contained blueprints of technologies that seem far ahead of their time. Did the library have scrolls describing machines of war, early steam engines, or mechanical devices? We know the Antikythera mechanism, a complex astronomical calculator, existed around the same era. Could Alexandria have had knowledge of such devices, perhaps even more advanced ones. If so, humanity may have lost inventions that could have changed the course of history. The global ambition, what made the library unique, was not just what it collected, but how far it reached. The Ptolemies commanded ships to seize any scrolls found in Alexandria's harbor. They borrowed works from Athens, Rhodes, and beyond. They sent agents to India, Mesopotamia, and Africa to collect writings. In time, the library may have contained texts from every corner of the known world. It was, in effect, the first attempt at a global archive. Closing reflection for Chapter 5. Close your eyes and imagine it. Row upon row of shelves, each scroll a fragile container of human thought. Some carried epic poems, others carried instructions for healing. Still others held secrets of the stars or the mysteries of the gods. To lose the library was to lose not just books, but entire worlds of knowledge. And yet, even as we grieve its loss, there is wonder in imagining what it held. The silence left behind reminds us how precious knowledge truly is.